So I'm very happy to welcome back to the show Real Progressives' very own Birrion Sondahl. Birrion, thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Luke.
So Birrion wrote a fantastic piece here. I want to show this to you up on the screen really quick. RealProgressives.org for all of our content, including articles from authors like Birrion. This is titled "Biden's Trainwreck." And it's talking a little bit about this potential railroad strike. Birrion, can you actually just start before we get into the details of this story? You did a little bit of background on Biden and his position on labor going back throughout his career. Can you just kind of lay the groundwork by talking about what Biden's role has actually been?
Yeah, Biden essentially has a history of being, pro-corporate and anti-labor. He started his career by saying that he would have prostituted himself for owners just to get money, to be in the Congress, to be in the Senate. And his history really is one that he's always sided with his corporate donors. They call him the senator from NBNA because that's the big bank that bankrolled him in his home state of Delaware and has really been the key factor behind most of his major decisions as a legislator. He voted for the Glass-Steagall Act, which was, one of the single worst acts against labor in the history of the United States, recent history. And it really was integral in the 2008 financial crisis because it deregulated Wall Street and allowed
Mhm.
for all this speculation.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you give some of the basic details here about the impending strike? What I'm reading is that the vote will actually happen this coming Thursday, so in just a few days here. Can you just give some of the background about where we're at with this specific issue?
Yeah, so the railway unions, and I think there's 10 or 12 of them, have been negotiating this deal with the bosses for the last 3 years. This has been a long, ongoing process. They, they've rejected this deal over and over again because the bosses aren't willing to cooperate with them on giving them the 15 days of paid sick leave that they requested. The Biden administration got involved this past summer, creating this presidential executive board that was, meant to negotiate between the railway unions and the corporations, but has generally come down on the side of the corporations. And also, what this did was it's really delayed the strike. I think the strike would have actually happened this summer if not for the creation of this board, this executive action by the Biden administration, which gave them like a 2 month period to delay the strike. And then last Friday, they were supposed to, strike at midnight if there hadn't been any kind of agreement. But the union leadership made an agreement along with the labor secretary and the Biden administration, a tentative agreement to, once again, hold off the strike for another 2 weeks, or maybe a little shorter if you're saying this Thursday. I haven't seen that latest information. But either way, it's another delay. The tentative agreement is very similar to the old agreement from everything I've heard. I haven't seen it actually, the text of the tentative agreement, but it's very similar to what this PEB came up with last summer, which included only 1 day of paid sick leave, where the unions were requesting 15 days.
It's incredible because 15 still sounds really low to me, especially for a job like that. And yet that's they're coming in at one. It's insane. A lot of the contention here appears to be less actually about like wages and more about lifestyle, like the having the ability to take time off and spend time with family and things. I've heard some of the workers talk about how they end up on the road a lot, just kind of sitting in motels and, things like this, being on call at odd hours and having to start work without knowing when you're going to start work, all these kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about what the objections here are from the workers? Because it seems a little bit unique here where it's not literally just pay me more.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things that they were interested in getting was actually even having a schedule,
Hmm.
which is kind of insane to me as well. Like, they were literally on call like 365 days a year. You read stories about it, and it's like they get called and they have to be in work within like 4 hours from being on call. Like,
Hmm.
might be 4 in the morning. And so this was a really big part of it was actually being able to have a scheduled, work schedule. And then alongside that, being able to take paid days off for, sickness. I know one thing the tentative agreement did, one concession it gave them was the ability to call in sick, not paid sick leave, but to call in sick and not be penalized for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They actually have like a point system where if you call in sick so many days, you lose points, and you could even potentially be fired if you miss too many days.
Yeah, I heard stories of some of the workers who were fired where some of their points were on like medical visits that you wait months to go to the doctor, and then you get called into work and it's like, sorry, I'm at the doctor, and you get penalized for this. It's absolutely insane. It's way beyond the pale.
Yeah, this is just absolutely awful treatment of their workers, and at the same time, the corporations, all these, it's railway corporations are making record profits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the big players is BNSF, which is owned by Warren Buffett, right? They're the trains that are always, if any of my viewers ever hear trains going by me, I'm just a few blocks from the rails here in Bellingham, and it's BNSF trains. A lot of what they're running is fossil fuel. It's just like it's all bad news, So you mentioned the sort of the mechanics of this, but there's also the potential for Congress to step in, and it appears that you had a quote from Pelosi in the article that might indicate that Congress is willing to do that and essentially override the workers' ability to strike. So what would that potentially look like, and how could we avoid that?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how we can avoid that. I mean, I guess the power is in the hands of the workers at this point. But it does look as if, we have this tentative agreement is voted down. And I do know at least one union has already voted it down with a pretty significant number, is the IAM 24, I believe. Yeah, said no way on this tentative deal. But it looks like if the workers do decide to go on strike, Congress, with a Democratic majority led by, Speaker of the House Pelosi, has made it clear that they would be willing to, you know, create an injunction, pass a bill essentially that would, make it illegal for them to go on strike, which is, absurd. But that's what we're seeing from this neoliberal regime. And I guess the only way around it is, I think, Sarah Nelson said on Macro and Cheese once, was that, there's no such thing as an illegal strike. There's only an unsuccessful strike. So the workers can go on strike no matter what Congress or Biden or anyone says. They just don't show up for work. And, if they call out the cops, then we're going to see a real labor struggle like we probably haven't seen since the 1920s, maybe the 30s, but Battle of Blair Mountain and something along those lines. And I don't know how militant these railway workers are willing to get, but it seems like the Biden administration is willing to play tough to try to save their midterms. They're claiming victory by derailing this railway strike. And I think they're speaking a little too soon.
That's a couple fantastic puns. That and the Trainwreck is a great title for the article, too. What do you think of the potential for, it seems to me that this is maybe a tough labor market for them to successfully replace with scabs. Do you see any potential there, or do you think this is actually kind of an ideal setting for these workers to take a really hard line?
I think, the workers definitely have the power. The Biden administration press secretary had said that they are looking into alternatives if the strike does occur. So they're looking to have like truckers and, airlines, whatever it might take to essentially scab on the railway strike and prevent it from having as much of an impact on the economy as it would otherwise. But, none of this can really equal the amount of freight that we see on the railway lines. So I think the workers really have the power still.
You'd found something that was really interesting to me that's kind of a side piece of this agreement that has to do with a very controversial treatment for people on the spectrum. Can you talk about what that entails? That was a little bit shocking to me.
Yeah, I was surprised to find that as well. I was just looking through this, agreement, the PEB board, their recommendations that they'd published over the summer, and I found that one of the recommendations they had in there was to have, ABA um, is fully covered, which is this, treatment for autistic children that has at times, in some places, it still involves electric shock aversion therapy. So essentially, trying to deprogram autistic children from their behaviors by the use of coercion. And not every version of this uses that shock therapy, but they use other methods, coercive methods, that are, it's almost very similar, I'd say, to like LGBTQ like conversion therapy. It's along the same lines of that as far as being like a total medical malpractice, and it's completely legal apparently still, but I don't know why it is, and I don't know why on earth they came up with this as a suggestion for railway
Right.
workers, that they have this fully covered.
Right. As though that's some sort of concession. We'll cover this now. If you'd like to abuse your children, we'll cover that. You
Yeah,
you had
no
mentioned
sick leave, but we're going to
yeah
cover your,
yeah
autistic child getting abused by, ABA therapy.
yeah. I mean it reads like an Onion article almost.
Hmm.
You had mentioned in here, if this were to become a strike, that it would be potentially the largest action coming from rail workers since a couple of times in the late 1800s. Can you just talk about the impact that this could potentially have should it go forward as a strike?
Yeah. So, like I've said, that railway lines are kind of the arteries of the United States when it comes to transferring freight and to commerce. I mean, you mentioned all these oil and natural gas and coal trains. There's a lot of coal trains that go through, the Northwest, coming out of like North Dakota and the oil fields out there and whatnot, and are
Mm-hmm.
then being shipped to China. Um, I read an article in Forbes actually that said that if this strike was to happen, it would cost the economy, which means the rich railway owners and basically the capitalist class, around $2 billion per day as long as the strike continued.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. And can you talk a little bit about the reverberating effects that can have? This, I think unique to other industries in that there's always kind of layers to these things. But when you're talking about transportation and shipping goods, there's sort of, particularly strong reverberating effects on the rest of the economy. Can you talk about how this could impact other industries as well?
Yeah, so to talk about how the current inflation is being caused by supply chain issues, although a lot of it's actually corporate price gouging, as we know
Mm-hmm.
here. But they're using this, supply chains as an excuse. And what we really would see from a railway strike would be real supply chain issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a lot of our food stuff is shipped on trains. You see a lot of grain cars, a lot of agricultural, a lot of cattle cars. Um, so any kind of stoppage of freight would really have an impact on food,
Mm-hmm.
especially in addition to those things, like I said, like the, coal and other exports to China. Um, and so, if you think food prices are bad right now, they're going to go up significantly with this strike. And you're going to expect the mainstream media is going to blame the labor,
Oh yeah.
blame the workers for being selfish and going on strike because they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to have 15 days of paid leave and didn't accept this one day. And so they're going to try to get people to sympathize with the capitalist owners and Buffett and whatnot, because, oh, he's so nice. He offered them one day of sick leave. Why didn't they accept that?
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
everyone is suffering because these selfish railway workers just wanted to be able to have a little bit of time off.
Yeah. Biden is so virtuous because 1 out of 365 days you're allowed to stay home from work sick.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So I'm curious what you think about it. It's interesting to me that we've kind of gotten a little sneak peek at what's going on in the UK in a very similar way, and how the media has covered that. And I'm curious what you think about how this is one that they'll have to cover, right? They can the mainstream media can kind of ignore the Starbucks unionization wave, and they can kind of just poo-poo a lot of this, but they can't ignore this one. How do you think that impacts the more general narrative around unions and perhaps this wave that we've seen across industries and across regions?
Well, I think if they do go on strike and it's a successful strike, which I think it would almost have to be, just because the amount of power that they have being able to shut down the railway networks. If we have a united unions all going on strike at the same time, if we have localized strikes, it'll be less powerful if some unions accept the agreement. But if we have a full on, all 120,000 some workers go on strike, like you said, they will have to cover it, and the media obviously will come down on labor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's been a single instance in history where labor has been portrayed positively by mainstream media. Michael Prenti talks about this in Inventing Reality, about how every time there's a strike, either it's not covered or it's covered in a negative light.
Mm-hmm.
But I think right now we're seeing record popularity for unionization in the United States. It's the highest it's been in, I think, about 40 years, maybe longer. I've seen something like 70% favorable rate. I'd have to look up those, but
I saw 71, which was the highest
Yep.
since the 60s.
Okay. Yeah. So in 60 years. And I think, a successful strike would really show the power that unions have, and there may be a little bit of backlash from the liberal class that are going to be inconvenienced by this strike, and by conservatives. But I think from the working class, they'll really see this as an opportunity of what organized labor can do when they really set their minds to it. So I really do hope that the unions get together and vote down this tentative agreement and really show everyone what the united working class can do.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. I'm curious what your thoughts are, just to circle back to Biden for a moment. My read on their coming to this proposal was essentially to frame the workers as the bad guys, so that now the workers are the ones that are saying no to something that is being portrayed in the press as quote unquote reasonable. Is that your read as well? And can you just maybe expand on that?
Yeah, I believe so. And I don't know that much about the actual leadership that was involved in these negotiations. But what we've seen generally in the labor movement is that union leadership is willing to betray the actual workers to side with neoliberal corporate Democrats. Often, we see this with the AFL-CIO all the time. Richard Trumka was famous for that, for betraying the working class and making deals with the neoliberal class that favored capital rather than the workers. And I see this as kind of being a repeat of the same thing. It's like you see a lot of discontent amongst the railway workers from what I've seen online from Twitter, and what I've been able to glean from different sources. I haven't obviously talked to any railway workers myself, but
Right.
It appears that there's a lot of discontent with this tentative agreement.
And do you think that Congress is sort of signaling that they might be willing to flex their muscle here? Do you think that that could potentially impact this vote in a way that's not so great for people like you and I who are rooting for a strike? It seems to me, if I'm a worker, that's sort of an added element that I now have to consider. If I vote against this deal, I might end up getting it anyway, and in a way that might be actually less palatable for me. Is there anything to that?
Yeah, I guess there's some potential of that. Like I say, it's it's in the hands of the workers right now. But yeah, Congress is going to do everything they can. The Biden administration is going to do everything they can to make sure this tentative agreement goes through. So I know there's a lot of pressure on union members to vote to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the the midterms are right around the corner here, and if there's a giant railway strike right before the midterms, it's going to make Biden look like a total fool.
Yep. Yeah, the political implications could definitely drive the decision making here. I certainly hope that the pressure I was talking about in that last question does not come to be. I'm hopeful the workers will stand strong here, but it seems unfortunate that this industry is so important that Congress is willing to butt in this way. And I think that I hope the workers will push on through that. Birrion, thanks again. Can you quickly just tell the audience where they can find your work?
Yeah, you can find my Substack, just birrion.substack.com. Also, I work on Real Progressives, and I also co-host the Crawdads and Taters podcast with Aaron McCarley, and you can find that at anchor.com.
Fantastic. And I'll put links to all of that in the description box for those watching this on YouTube. Birrion, thank you so much for taking the time. Always appreciate it. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great talking to you too, Luke.